Welcome to another episode of Leadership Lessons. My guest today is Amy Petersen, and we're going to talk about the unseen role of a pastor's wife. Amy, thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gray. I'm grateful for the space to have this conversation.
Let me tell you about Amy. Amy is a Bible teacher, speaker, and ministry wife who has spent over 25 years walking alongside women in life and ministry. Through her teaching, writing, and podcasts, she helps women build resilient, scripture-rooted faith that holds steady in both everyday life and difficult seasons. Amy's passionate about honest relational discipleship that encourages spiritual health without guilt or performance. And she and her husband have three boys, and we heard the oldest one just got married. And so, Amy, we're great to have you on the show, and look forward to talking to you about this important topic. So, how did you end up being a pastor's wife? Tell us about that.
Well, it's always a lot of unexpected twists and turns
Okay.
for most of our stories.
Yeah.
But they have been a pastor's wife for 27 years with
Yeah.
an 8-year stint in between.
Okay.
And I kind of backed up into it. I knew that I was called to love and serve women in scriptural context and teaching, but never assumed that that would include being a ministry wife, and actually didn't want to be.
Yeah.
And as I fell in love with my husband, who I met in college, and then we were both in Dallas, Fort Worth, he was going to seminary. As I fell in love with him, it changed everything, just who he was and his call. And so it is the space that God has given me that I never knew I wanted, but it's the very thing that I needed and was created to do. So I was really, really looking back, I'm so grateful.
It's amazing how the things that we fight against sometimes are just the greatest things we ever could have imagined, and look back and
Mhm.
and say that to the Lord. My wife, her dad was a pastor, and she said she would never marry a pastor. And of course, God has his ways, and so we've enjoyed an incredible life. And I'll say this, Amy, that Connie, growing up in a pastor's home, she brought something into our marriage that I'm not sure I would have survived ministry without. Well, I wouldn't have
Mm,
without her. Period. But she brought some insight into just how church works that I wouldn't have
mm.
had. So, why
That's
is the
wonderful.
role of a pastor's wife? Why do you think it's often unseen or misunderstood?
Mm. I think there's a lot of us that walk around and are only seen as maybe an appendage of our husband's
Okay.
ministry, as if we're not someone individual apart from that. Uh, I have so many times had questions not about me, but about my husband's
Right.
job or the
Right.
role or what's going on at church,
Yep.
as if I have this like unending conduit of information church things.
Yeah.
And sometimes I could go for weeks and months without someone saying, Amy, how are you? What are
Oh yeah.
you interested in? So I feel unseen. There's a
Yeah.
lot of unseen, which
Well.
is in the title of this.
Yep.
And loneliness goes along with that,
Yeah.
because you only see what I project. And there's a lot of guardiness that happens with that too.
Yeah.
And so, from people not really seeing you as an individual, but then also the loneliness that can come in your own guardedness, are two of the big parts of feeling unseen and misunderstood.
So let's talk about your answer a little bit. So
Hmm.
I know that people, certainly with the best motives, they may use a pastor's wife to try and get information about something,
Hmm.
or to transfer their own thoughts about something. Hey, I don't like that this is going on in the church, or I'm not real happy about this decision. Kind of like you're going to do something about that. How do you handle that, Amy? And how can you help other wives think through? Because those are really challenging things when someone's trying to either pull information out of you or try to get you to use your influence with your husband.
Exactly. And that is a wonderful space to kind of plant on right now,
Hmm.
because it is something that is not always talked about. And
Yeah.
how in the world do you respond to that? And sometimes I have felt like people's expectations to be a good, faithful ministry wife, I have to meet every question that they answer. But what I have learned in establishing healthy boundaries and as a ministry wife in that role, I have learned to do these few things: lead with grace. Oh my goodness, that is such a great question. I am so glad that you're thinking about that and have put some thought towards this. I can see that you put some thought towards this. But the best way to get this addressed and to hear your concerns heard is to reach out to my husband,
Yeah.
and call his assistant and get an appointment with him, because I know that he would really love to hear your thoughts on this. So I absolutely deflect, even if I know some of the answers
Yeah.
because I will not, if I step into it a little bit,
Yeah.
then I'm hooked and they're going to see me as a stream of information and a resource to that information.
I think one of the great things for Connie was that when I was pastoring, I pastored for 20 years, was that we just didn't
Mm,
talk about a lot of, I mean, some things. If I was
yeah,
working through an issue, she has such wisdom that she would help me,
yeah,
but we just didn't talk about a lot of day-to-day church stuff. And she'd be
yeah.
like, "I have no idea. You're going to have to talk to Todd about that." That was her kind of her pat standard answer, and it worked about every time. And folks pretty soon realized she's not going to tell him anything. I can't get anything from. And people mean well, but
They
yeah,
do.
yeah.
They
So
so do. And sometimes I'm a softer entry
yeah,
than my husband.
sure.
And so I think it's easier sometimes for them to come to me and ask me those questions, thinking that in pillow talk, I'm going to share these
Right,
things with my
100%.
husband.
Yeah,
But it is something that he talks to me a lot about things.
sure.
And that's what's interesting because when you brought that up, I've talked to a lot of ministry wives, and there's a lot who don't talk a lot, but then there's a lot who do. And so being able to navigate the vast spectrum of that in a marriage is really important to have a conversation with your husband about.
So, Amy, part of your answer also was the aspect of loneliness of a pastor's wife and kind of a sense of what could be guardedness. I'm 61, be 62 this year. Connie and I are the same age. So when I was pastoring, we were really careful about church friendships. You know, we didn't we felt like there were appropriate boundaries we had to set. I see younger
Hmm.
pastors and wives that maybe are experiencing maybe a little more openness in that area.
Hmm.
How do you navigate friendships as a pastor's
Hmm.
wife, wanting to care well for all the people, and yet we all need friends, right? How do you handle
Exactly.
that?
That is really tricky. And it a lot depends on your personality. It depends a lot on the church context that you're in, I think. And I've talked to so many women across the country about establishing friendships. And here are the few things that I have found as myself, but then also have discovered in what has been helpful to other people. Um, there is a wisdom about being vulnerable, but yet being open to people and their lives and being compassionate. And so there's a certain, I kind of trial run it with friendships, whereas I give a little bit of information about myself and see how they handle it,
Yeah.
and then just continue to vet like that. But then there's also beyond the church, places within your community and neighborhood
Hmm.
that I had one ministry wife in Oklahoma who just began a bunco group with people within
Oh,
her
good.
community, her church, and outside of her church.
Yeah.
And those have been her best friends over the last 20 years, where she just says, "Hey, I'm lonely. Do you want to get together and play bunco?"
That's fun.
And it has become a prayer piece for them. They've supported each other, but there are namely people outside of her church that she's done that with. So it can range the gamut, but I think being open, but yet not totally transparent with all the things that you are going through and taking time, um, knowing that it takes time to grow things, takes time to grow friendships and trust, and being able to be patient with that.
Amy, I love the ability to be transparent and that pastor's wife saying, "Hey, I'm lonely. Can we get together and play bunco?" I can't imagine any man ever uttering those words. "I'm lonely. Can we go play racquetball or can we go for a bike ride together?" But I think women definitely have the advantage relationally over men in the area of loneliness and fighting against it. Hey, so oftentimes the conversation about ministry wives can be kind of negative. There are a lot of pressures that you face, and you mentioned a couple of those. I'd love to hear if there are any others that come to
Mhm.
mind, but then also let's jump to what are some of the joys. So, any other
Mhm.
pressures that you think, in general,
Mhm.
from your experience and working with others, that ministry wives are experiencing that's just different from being married to a banker or
Mhm.
a guy who's a factory worker
Mhm.
or whatever else a person's husband may do? What are
Mhm.
some of the pressures, and then let's jump to some of the joys.
Yeah, for me, being a deeply empathetic person and loving people and wanting to get into their messes and help
Yeah.
them, I have owned a lot of over responsibility
Okay.
for the outcomes.
Yeah.
And that has tripped me up more than anything in ministry. The exhaustion that comes with that, the over responsibility for their choices. And that has been a huge challenge for me to really implement healthy boundaries and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a part of the challenges that most of us face is people are exposing their messes to us. And so how we handle that will really be indicative of longevity and resiliency in ministry.
Hmm.
So that's a challenge. The joys, oh my goodness. I mean, we have been out of church ministry for 8 years. My husband took a stint as in higher education for a little bit, and we are now just coming back into church ministry. And let me tell you, the joy of entering into a place and a party is thrown for you.
Hmm.
Everyone is
That's
excited
great.
that you're here. People, there's an interest in wanting to get to know you. And so just for that, there's also a flip side to that, but that is a gift and a joy when you're coming into a new place. Another joy is being able to see God work on the front row seat
Mm.
and being able to hear the messes and be able to point them to Jesus, but then also see what he does in transformation in their lives is one of the greatest joys.
Yeah, those are. I'm just thinking as you talk, and I think we would have said the same thing that you've described. Our children experienced a joy in being
Mm.
pastored kids that they never experienced church trouble. They didn't ever know there was
Mm.
any church trouble. I mean, they may have had some ideas about this or that, but they were just
Yeah.
kind of sheltered from most of that. And they had a great church life when I was their
Mm.
pastor. And Amy, it was interesting. I don't know what it's like for your boys, but for them, I think what they missed most when I stopped pastoring to go into state convention work while they were still in
Mhm.
high school. I think what they missed most were the relationships with older people.
Mhm.
They
Mm.
loved the just the older church members who would hug them on Sunday morning and ask how their life was going and talk to them and just take an interest. What was that like for your
Mm.
children? Did they have yeah, those
Yeah,
relationships?
I think that's really good because it is a family.
Yeah.
It's a community. And we served for 13 years here before, and we were far away from our family in Oklahoma. And
Yeah.
so really our church became our community. And it was interesting. Now we've come back to the same church, and instead of three boys, we have one boy living at home,
Hmm.
and he's now 14. He
Okay.
left when he was 7.
Wow.
And the people are hugging him like a long lost family member, and he has no recollection
So
of
good
who
for
they
him.
are.
What an experience.
And so I think just feeling the family bond that happens in community, and that is one of the intangible things for those who aren't church attenders, who don't know they're missing, um, it being a part of a church family.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that's his
Mhm.
experience. Well,
Mhm.
Amy, how can churches better support and encourage their pastors' wife?
Mhm.
Because I know folks want to. If the
Yeah.
couple's not happy together, it's hard for them to have a successful ministry. What are two or three things a
Mhm.
church can do, or somebody in a
Mhm.
church can do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just have to say that the church that we're in and have been at are just such wonderfully hearted people. And it is an absolute joy to serve here at Shannon Baptist Church in Columbia, South Carolina. And some of the things that I've learned that are really important to me are when people stop and ask me about me and see me as an individual.
Oh yeah, yep.
That's one. They say thank you for all the ways that you are serving and loving the church in ways that may not be seen. Because my husband, is executive pastor here and is leading very visibly. And my heart is teaching Bible studies and discipling women. And sometimes that can be overlooked or minimized based on the way people kind of hold leadership and hierarchy. And so, just in seeing me and encouraging me in my gifts, I think the church is just such a sweet place to see the ministry wife as an individual and say thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's encouraging, and it makes perfect sense. So, how should a pastor and his wife protect their marriage and ministry? Because I heard
Mm,
you mention kind of the ministry fatigue, and if you have a heart to help people, boy, the folks need a lot of help, right? And you can hear a lot of
hmm.
issues, and you can just be so drained by that it's
Yes,
hard to have time to give to each other. What have you seen that
yes.
helps? What have you seen that doesn't work? What mistakes have you seen folks make in this area?
Mm,
Yeah, what advice do you have?
mm. There are definitely seasons in church ministry which are heavy and intense, and they're seasons. of that. And there's certain times in which you just got to gear up and go, go, go. But if that is a consistent pattern over a long haul, it is a red flag.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've so appreciated that my husband has done when he comes home from work, he puts his phone down
Yeah.
and comes up to me and looks me in the eye
Oh, yeah.
and just listens and says, "How was your day today?" and listens.
Oh, good for him.
I mean,
Yeah.
that sounds like a very small innuendo that you don't even think needs to happen, but I feel prioritized in that moment. And if that can be a practice and a habit of husbands when they come home from work or from church, Wednesday night services or whatever it is, just to value their wife and differentiate their marriage from every other relationship that they have.
I mean,
I think that that's really important.
that's so helpful. Your husband's helping a lot of us right there because it's so easy. If you're in a leadership role, I mean, you're kind of carrying that leadership burden all the time. It never goes away. And
Mm-mm.
it's easy to have your head full of the top three,
Mhm.
five, seven things that you're trying to deal with and work through. And
Mhm.
those go to bed with you. They wake up with you. They're there with you the next day. They're with you in the
Mhm.
car, and it's easy for them to be with you when you walk in the door at home. That's super, super helpful. What else
That's
have you
good.
seen others do that's helpful to
Mm.
make sure they keep their marriage strong while they're trying to serve others?
Have fun together.
Yeah.
Go to, even if it's an afternoon, and go to a park. Remember why you fell in love with each other,
Hmm.
because it can get so overwhelming with all the needs and all the tasks and all the pressures of leading a church does to a marriage and to a family. But to go away and have fun together, it reconnects you to the reason why you're together and really prioritizes your relationship above the work that God has called you to do.
Amy, some of the best advice I heard early on as a pastor, and I think it's applicable for our conversation, was from Charles Stanley. It was from folks that don't know him. He was a longtime pastor of First Baptist Church, Atlanta, Georgia, and he
Mhm.
this I think it was from a pastors conference, and I would have heard it through a cassette tape. Now, folks may not know what those are, but that's where I would have heard this advice. I was driving along and listening to him, and so a lot of pastors' background in Kentucky are bivocational. Probably 65-70% are bivocational. They work a full time job plus their full time church work. And
Mhm.
Stanley's advice was, if you're a pastor, take a vacation with your family, save your money all year long, do
Mhm.
the best you can, whatever you can do, but make sure that you take a family vacation. That was
It's
really
good.
good advice for me. That wasn't something my family really did growing up, and so
Mhm.
we kind of we made that a priority. And I
Mhm.
know it's been good for our marriage, and it's been good for our family. Uh,
That's good.
so, Amy, how do you protect your children? Sometimes
Mhm.
people can put, maybe unintentionally, expectations, right, on a pastor's
Mhm.
child. How do you kind of guard your children
Mhm.
against that, and yet hold them to a high standard as followers of Jesus? How do you manage that as a mom and a pastor's wife?
Most of the burdens and worries when I talk to ministry wives is for their children
Hmm.
in the midst of ministry work, and wanting them to own their own faith, but yet wanting them to have a clear picture of what faith looks like. So I think what I have found is in the home, you continue to communicate that our place is not ministry, our place is Jesus to elevate. We're here because we love Jesus. We do this because of Jesus and what he's
Hmm.
done for me. And make sure that the elevation of Jesus is bigger than the elevation of the church and the ministry.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think has really been helpful in communicating to our kids, and again, communication over and over again, that they are not an extension of our platform, but they are our heart. And I think oftentimes kids can very quickly feel used
Hmm.
as a billboard to the church,
Hmm.
and the parents get really wrapped up in their behavioral outcomes.
Yep.
And for us, being able to accept and embrace the fact that they're not perfect,
Yeah.
and to be able to say that to them. And be able to give them space to grow and change, and figure things out, has been a really messy journey,
Sure.
but one that I think that they need to have space to know that they are not being used as a picture of perfection for our ministry.
Yeah, and it's more complicated, I believe, than people think. I mean, there's actually a
Hmm.
biblical job qualification for this pastor that he manages his own household
Exactly.
well, right? And yet at the same time, you're raising disciples of Christ. You're raising children who you
Yes.
want to walk with Jesus. and that's not always easy. And they're a little more public as you know, so they don't always just behave very well, right? I mean, our kids just don't always
Right.
do it exactly right. So how do you manage? I mean,
Hmm.
how have you had to try to think through some of those things? Like, hey, this is not the church, but this expectation. I expect you to to
Hmm.
to behave this, and then
Yeah.
guard your own heart. Like, what are folks thinking about my kids right now when he's throwing a tantrum over here or she's throwing a fit? Any further thoughts there?
Exactly. No, I think those are really good things to bring up, whether they're a toddler 2-year-old
Yep.
and not wanting to put on their shoes, or whether they're a 17-year-old and not wanting to come in for curfew.
Yeah.
So there's like this vast gamut, and there can be inklings of murmurs of what people know your kid is doing apart from you, but you feel it. And that
Right.
is so hard. And so one thing that we've tried to do with our boys is to communicate, listen, I love and care about you. Let's talk about how this reflects the best life that God wants you to have in
Yeah.
this, and create those kinds of things and allow them to know that it is about them that we care more about. For us, we have had to be able to think, okay, what people say about us and our kids is not the standard of how we're going to live our life
That's good.
or the success or failure of our ministry. To be so rooted in the fact that we are all sinners. And just even if as a parent, I can do all the right things, say all the right things, do all the devotionals and have them in youth camp and all the things,
Hmm.
they're still going to need to grapple with sin as their own choice.
Right.
And we've got to give them space to do that and be there with them in the midst of it, but not to think that their their behavior is a reflection of my parenting. I could do all the right things and the outcome could be so different than what I had hoped for.
Yeah. And parenting, I mean, if you're a married couple, parenting takes two people, right? And
Oh
and
my,
for
yes.
for at the in church life, often one of those people is in the pulpit and he's preaching a
Yes.
sermon, and where those other couples, they have two people working together to kind of manage these children. But for a lot of pastors' wives, they're trying to handle that on their own, along with these
That's right.
pressures that they're feeling that uh, you know, biblically, I want my children to behave and act right. I want to be a good parent, training them, and yet there is a feeling that I am being watched in a different way here. I think that's
Exactly.
just difficult, and I think most folks really
Hmm.
don't think about what the average
Hmm.
pastor's wife is dealing with when
Hmm.
she's trying to manage even that 1 hour, hour and a half, whatever the length of the church service. Amy, you've mentioned boundaries a couple of times. What
Hmm.
boundaries have you and your husband set to maintain the health of your family?
Mm. I love talking about boundaries because I think sometimes in Christian circles it can be seen as being selfish and like a boundary is a wall, but a boundary is actually a fence,
Yep.
and it allows you to see where you start or end at another person's start. So it's what am I really responsible for? And so for me and my husband, we have had conversations about what he even expects
Hmm.
and what he needs help with in my role, and then being able to talk through those things and not have them be an automatic deal. My husband and I first talk through it and come up kind of with a plan. So like right now, in the life that I'm living with one kid at home and doing ministry work myself, my husband's in church
Yep.
work, I have to limit myself to 2 lunches a
Yeah,
week
it's good.
because I know that that is all I have time for. So right now I'm actually planning a month out, but I'm actually lining up 2 a week. And so my husband and I say, okay, how many nights at home
Yep.
are we able to sit around and have dinner together? My son has a soccer game tonight, and he is going to be able to peel away and go see that, to show up and be present at those kinds of events. And so I think it takes a lot of intentionality. Boundaries don't just happen.
Nope.
And so being able to talk to your husband about those things for your family, for your marriage, and then how you're going to serve the people within your church. I think it is really important to have conversations about that.
And that conversation has to be a give and take, right? I mean, it has to be
Hmm.
like we're thinking through this and we're kind of negotiating this together.
Yes.
Because if you're
Yes.
if you're in vocational ministry, you can't just go join a travel soccer league on Sunday mornings, and
Exactly.
they're going to expect you to show up and take care of your responsibility at church. Amy, I continue to bring up Connie because she was just smart in this
Mm.
area. One of the best conversations we had early on in our marriage. was when we decided how many nights a week I would be out. I was already out on Sunday
Mm-hmm.
night and Wednesday night because of church responsibilities, and that's time away from our family. And we decided I'd
Mm-hmm.
be out one more night a week on visitation, and that we'd have all of our dinners together every night, and that I'd have breakfast with the girls almost every morning. And those were just some boundaries we put in place.
Mm-hmm.
You're moving from the theoretical to the practical, and those are game changing
That's
disciplines
good.
for a healthy family and healthy ministry marriage. How do you
That's
how do
good.
you guard your identity in Christ
Mm.
apart from the roles that you have? So not only are you you're answering this quote pastor's wife questions, but you're also a ministry leader. How do you just kind of say how do you guard against how do you guard your
Mm.
identity?
One of the best lines of defenses is to stay connected with Jesus on a daily basis.
Hmm.
It is so easy in ministry to know so much and actually ingest in order to pour out. But what about just sitting at the feet of Jesus on a daily basis as his child, communicating with him, confessing to him, and giving him your day and your to-do list? So I think that's the first thing that I have seen and talked with so many ministry wives. That is one of the first things to go, but it is the best thing to do, is to have that time protected and guarded, to know who you are and who God says you are, not by all the things that you have taught,
Hmm.
but because you have spent intimate time with your Lord and Savior and your Father in the morning, before you start your day. But then also, I think it is to understand, and I had a hard time with this early on because I was so overjoyed and excited about being a ministry wife
Hmm.
and what God was doing, that I began to see the role as a definition of who I was
Yeah.
instead of a description.
Yeah.
And to be able to lock in, this is just a description of me. It's not what I am defined by.
Hmm.
And 1 Corinthians 15:10 says, by the grace of God, I am what I am.
Amen.
And his grace to me is not without effect. And so just being locked in, and that's why that daily morning time with the Lord is so important, because it fixes your eyes on the truth of who you are. So then you can serve within his power and not your own, on the day to day.
Yeah, I love that notion of giving your to-do list to Jesus, and
Hmm.
that's just kind of helps put things in perspective. So,
Hmm.
Amy, you're talking to a lot of younger pastors' wives who are just trying to kind of figure this thing out. I mean, they're trying to
Hmm.
navigate it. They have children, maybe young even in their marriage, and they're new to a ministry. I'm thinking of a couple that's just going to be brand new in Kentucky. They just got married, just graduated from seminary, and they're coming to their first church. What advice do you have for those younger ministry wives who are trying to understand their role and be
Hmm.
faithful?
Give yourself time and be patient with learning. Realize that you are learning what God has for you in this season, and it changes from church to church. It changes from season to season. So be patient with yourself and give yourself grace. You're not going to know how to do everything. But then also be, very resolved in knowing that you are not the fixer of people's
That's
problems,
good.
that Jesus is the Savior, you're not. He is the one who convicts. He is the one who changes. He is the one who moves. He is the one who transforms. You are not. And so many times I've had conversations with women and walk away going, oh, I hope they get it. I hope they make the right choice. And there's been times that I have gone, just felt so much responsibility for keeping them in, the right lane with Jesus.
Hmm.
But it's not mine to fix.
Yeah.
I am to be obedient, but the outcome is not mine to hold. And so if early on I could have known that,
Yeah.
if early on I could have realized that it is not my responsibility, it's only God's to do that. I'm to be obedient in the moment, and
So,
then I can walk away praying for them.
so Amy, if you're talking to let's say her husband comes to you and says, Amy,
Mm,
how can you help me to care well for my
mm,
wife as a ministry wife? Would you give that same advice to him? Be patient with your
mm.
wife, understand that she's learning and growing, or would you change any of it at all?
No, I think that's a great kind of twist to, the delivery, the person of delivery. I would say be patient, be gracious, give her space to figure it out,
Hmm.
encourage her,
Yeah.
be one of her biggest cheerleaders and champions in that. But then also, we are each gifted differently.
Hmm.
And just because there is a need in the church doesn't mean the ministry wife is the one to fill it.
Right.
Now, there's seasons in which you just got to do. You just got to do it to make it happen. But over the long haul, for him to be very sensitive to make sure that she is serving in her gifting
Yeah.
is so validating in the marriage. Like, for example, we've just moved back here a year ago, and I've been doing this long enough to know that I've given myself a year.
Hmm.
Um, Even though we've served in the same church, given myself a year to figure out what this season looks like for me before I jump into anything or say yes to anything. And so my husband has been so sweet and respectful to that guarding that I have on myself just to get my family settled and me settled. So I think the validation that a husband brings when he honestly listens to his wife and stands behind her in
Hmm.
that is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. I wouldn't have thought probably of those things to tell a pastor to think about his wife. I would tell him one thing additionally would say you need to be ready to defend your wife, and you need to be able to explain her role
Yes.
to your church, that God didn't call her to be the pastor of this church, and God didn't call you to as co-pastors.
Mm.
God called you, God the man as a pastor, and his wife will do whatever God calls her to do, just like every other member of this church. And I think that helps a congregation. My wife, Connie will say she's not going to play the piano. She's not going to lead the WMU. She's not going to lead the women's Bible study, but she's going to answer the calling, fulfill the role that
Yeah.
God has for her. And pastors'
Yeah.
wives need to have that freedom in a church.
I agree. And I think that's one way that the husband can lead out in protecting
Yep.
her with
Yep.
that is exactly what you said. It is so helpful.
Amy, last question. So leadership is tough, and you are a ministry leader, and ministry leaders learn lessons. Sometimes we learn them the hard way, right? Can you think of
Yes.
one leadership lesson that you learned the hard way? And if you have a wonderfully embarrassing story to tell along with it, we'd love to hear that part as well. If not, that's okay. At least what's the lesson you learned the hard way?
Well, it's so interesting. I think that as I look back, so often I would measure my success based on how I perceive others are responding to me in my
Okay.
ministry.
Well,
And there was one example in which I was leading a conference, and one of my friends was sitting down, just down on the right on the table. And as I was pouring out my heart and teaching, I was looking at her, and her face was very constricted and furrowed. And I mean, I
every preacher, every Sunday, Amy. So, but please go ahead.
okay, so you're getting this. And so, but I could not get off of her. So while I'm saying words out of my mouth,
Yeah,
I am internalizing, oh my gosh, this is not making sense. This is not
yeah,
landing. Who do I think I am?
yeah.
I'm a fraud up here. They just think that I'm up here just singing and dancing and just doing my little thing for Jesus, but it's not really landing. I was so preoccupied with what I perceived her um, opinion of me was
Hmm.
that I walked out of that, and for weeks I did a pity party and
Yep.
some self-condemning internally for
Wow.
myself,
Yeah.
and really disqualified myself from ever doing anything like that again.
Hmm.
Well, lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail from her.
Wow.
And she said, Amy, I was so touched by what you said. God really worked on my heart. It was something that I needed to hear exactly then. I can't tell you how grateful I am
Wow.
for what you shared because it really was meaningful to me.
That's incredible.
And I was
Yep.
like, I was wrong. I
Hmm.
was absolutely wrong. So, what I have learned from that the hard way is I cannot take anyone's perception as a validation or a
Yeah.
success or failure of what I'm doing for the Lord, because all I'm doing is stepping out in obedience, and God is dealing with the other things. And so I remember that a lot when I see people's
Yep.
perplexed faces, because I'm like, I don't know what they're dealing with,
Nope.
and it's not for me to decide.
And sometimes they're just sleepy. And sometimes they're thinking about, I left something on the stove, or I'm not sure I turned off the iron, or whatever it is, or what. Yeah, it's such good advice to not measure your value or success in
Mm-mm.
either side of that equation on whether folks respond affirmatively or not. If you want to know more about Amy Petersen, it is amypetersen.net. You can learn more about her. One book that she recommends is How to Thrive as a Pastor's Wife. She said that's been helpful for her. Amy, thank you for the incredible advice. Thank you for the conversation and for your ministry. And thank you for joining Leadership Lessons.
It's been a delight. Thank you, Dr. Gray.
Thanks for listening to Leadership Lessons. An audio podcast of this program is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and more. The Kentucky Baptist Convention was created by churches for churches to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. For more information about the KBC and the cooperative program which fuels our ministry, go to kybaptist.org. We'll see you next time on Leadership